Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to do a recent reads, Friday reads, a weekly reads, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to stick to 6 books, though I have read 12, just because I think it'll run long. And I'm going to see if this little 6-book experiment makes me expand to the same time frame anyway, where I'm talking the same amount, like 25 minutes-ish, with 6 books, or if I compress it and I have a shorter video that is ostensibly more appealing to more people instead of it being, generally fairly long, but featuring quite a few books. So we'll see how it goes. First up is An Unnecessary Woman by Rabih Alameddine, hopefully. I give this 5 stars. I heard about this on Sheila Swearingen's channel. She has a top 10 reads of last year, as most YouTubers have, or booktubers have. And this was on it. It was really interesting to me, and I ended up loving it, so I'm glad that I picked it up. It is about an older lady who I think is like in her 60s-ish, I think. She lives in Beirut, and she's a very quiet, sort of mousy, unobtrusive widow, or more like divorcee, though I think she is technically widowed as well. She has a very nice apartment that's quite big and quite coveted by her family because as she is divorced, generally the property is supposed to go to the husband, who then would assign it to someone else. But just because of the way things fell out, she has been living there by herself, and her pastime is translating fairly complex works, like maximalist works, to just very high lit things like Camus, and more just the best lit from other sources. So she translates a translation. She knows French, English, and she's moving the text to Arabic, and so she is one removed from the translation, essentially, because the English and French is already a translation of the thing that she is targeting usually. And so she has it in mind that these things would only appeal to her, but it's her favorite thing to do, her favorite pastime. And the narration is just like a sort of stream of consciousness one in vignettes mostly, where we learn about her life, about her past, all the way from when she was a child to the current day. It moves in and out of time seamlessly. It's not chronological generally. Sometimes it is somewhat, but it does bounce around quite a bit as well. And it's just a really lovely interior book. She, hardly moves. She thinks that she's very necessarily isolated because other people wouldn't warm to her or like her. And there's a more or less plot that trails her inner workings, her interiority, as she is processing certain events. One of her family members takes her mother to go see her, and she promptly screams at her, seemingly not recognizing her maybe, or something like that. They want the mother to live with her. She denies them, and basically events spin out from there, as well as her focus of the interiority, the thoughts and the musings that she has on what's going on or what might be happening. Because she's a translator, there's an ecosystem of reference material, some of which you'll be aware of, some of which you won't. She likes to name drop really famous people, but she always provides, or usually mostly provides, context in the form of a direct quote from the work that she is saying. So yeah, I didn't mind it. It didn't feel like it was too pretentious. It's somewhat pretentious, but the right amount of pretension just for me, basically. I really love the character. I like her character arc. The ending is fantastic. You feel for her. It was a very emotional book, which is very rare for me, I would say. And yeah, I just absolutely loved it. It was by far and away 5 stars. I had no complaints. Even it's one of those books where you love that it's slow, it's a very enriching experience where you just sink right into it and don't want to leave, basically. Next, I read Post-Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson. This is a Booker-eligible book, and it is sort of heralded as the Damaged Woman Moving DWM book, but post. And it is kind of that, I have to say, like a mosh fag, but deeper or something. It's about a Black woman in New York living her life. She is clearly somewhat damaged, and the interesting thing about it is it's steeped in really granular details that seem superfluous at current reading. Especially the beginning. It's hard to situate yourself and figure out why this granularity is present. but it's hyper focused on her internal processes of just dealing with the everyday world, in which she is encountering microaggressions, racism, evaluating men as to like how threatening they are to her and stuff. And the interesting thing about that is that sometimes she is wrong about the situation. Maybe not often, but more like you're guessing as a reader, basically. You're not totally sure, because her motivated thinking is the thing that you're consuming. And so you're motivated to think her, it's not quite unreliable narrator, but something like that is happening. And her thought processes, she's very like intelligent, she's a lawyer, she's a feminist, she thinks in like racial, socio-political terms, she has like great diction, the voice is entirely convincing in this. And so when she has a certain thought process that is maybe somewhat toxic or clearly wanting to be maybe overly defensive in a situation, you can see why she goes there, and it feels valid in the moment. But then as these events kind of come back on her, the consequences of her actions and certain things spin out. And that's more or less what the plot is. I wouldn't say it's a very plotty book, just like A Necessary Woman is not a very plotty book, though there is a plot present. It's not what you show up for. It's more about showing the internal processes of such a character that has been traumatized, and how to get, you know, her an accurate rendering, I guess, of her post-traumatic life, and whether or not she actually does something about that. You know, like as a reader, you're more apt to spot her patterns than she is probably, which makes it kind of fascinating. You're like in on a secret-ish kind of thing. She burns bridges with her friends that are well-intentioned. She perceives slights where there isn't none sometimes, but she's also hyper empathetic. She's also got a lot of kindness and a lot of particular like space for certain people in her network, I guess. And sometimes she burns people out of that, out of a sort of self-preservation thing. But it's just a fascinating character study. And I think it does a really good job of, like I said, capturing the like damaged woman moving throughout the world type situation. It's a very slow book in terms of pace, in terms of pretty much everything, because there's, like I said, necessarily a lot of granularity, and she has to situate and put into context all this socio-political stuff that she has a lot of information of. And the author does a really good job, I think, of conveying all that stuff without it making it like a capital P political book, even though as a Black woman, she is a politicized, racialized body that's moving throughout the world. So I thought it was a really great book. It does drag in some parts, and that is primarily why I gave it 4 stars out of 5. Next is Pure Color by Sheila Heti. I guess she is a Canadian, and I didn't even know it, so that's good. This is another eligible for Booker 2022 book, which maybe isn't the primary reason I picked it up, but one of them. I hadn't read any Heti before and heard good things. This is a really interesting book, even though it was not for me. I gave it 4 stars, though I would say I did not enjoy the book at all. So keep that in mind as I tell you what this book is about. As I see it, it's sort of a parable or a folkloric tale. Somebody is probably conveying to a child or something like that. It's hard to tell because these things are never really codified, but it reads like that. There's a distillation of character as well as thematics, imagery, and a few things like that that make it very poetic feeling as well. But it's also definitely trying to convey some certain things, some certain information to another person, which is why it sort of feels like maybe a child being told the story of maybe how these people met, or like a kind of sort of love story, but not really. It's very queer in many different ways, including themes and imagery, as well as the actual characters, who are both women, I believe. And it's another sort of not much plot is happening in the book. Yes, there are some larger movements in it, but more or less it is so abstract in what it is trying to convey that I wouldn't hold on to something like that. I would say come for the imagery, for the poetic prose, which are very good, I think. It is kind of prescriptive and feels sort of self-helpy, trying to convey certain things about the world as you would expect in a folkloric, abstract telling sort of thing like this, which is just not my jam, right? Like, I hate the Midnight Library for its prescription of those things, and this definitely feels exactly like that. It's very like pseudo-spiritual, not particularly like Western denomination, I would say, in particular, but like, yeah, trying to convey very personal, spiritual things to the reader, and therefore to, you know, whoever this narrator is talking to. You don't really get a grip on the narrator. It's very like slippery, I would say. and I don't like that as well. I usually like to know who is narrating the story, why they're doing that, what time period they're in, stuff like that. And this is not caring about that at all, basically. So yeah, in terms of enjoyment, I would say it's a no-go, but from taking the central conceit of what this book is and rolling with it, and if you're into it, I can easily give it a 4 out of 5 stars because it definitely exceeds the expectations that I had for what it sets up in the beginning, even if it's not the thing that is for me, you know? Next is another Booker 2022 eligible book, Burntcoat, Sarah Hall. This book is also, I would say it has more plot than the others, but still more concerned with interiority, memory in the times of a virus that has ravaged the world. There's more viruses to come as well as a preview. This is a topical thing. There's one protagonist who is essentially dual timelines. It's a series of vignettes with no chapters. We're moving in one stream, one back, one forwards, one in the future, one in the past, etc. She is recounting her childhood, her life with her parent who was severely left, I hope disabled is the correct term to assign the person. She was in an accident. Well, she had a brain bleed thing, and I think she was also in an accident at one point in the story as well, and so she has multiple things going on with her. She was an artist and she has to rehabilitate herself into becoming like the kind of the parent person that she was previously, which shatters the family unit and makes the protagonist, who also is, as we see in the present day, an artist that works with, it seems like, primarily like sculpture stuff. I don't know much about it, so I am going to be very light on those details. But so she becomes the primary caregiver to her mother, and the father is basically not in the picture. And then we get this series of events where a virus hits the UK this takes place in, and we find out also what happens after her, having to be the caregiver as a very young child, because she is not in the same place in the future, and it alludes to a bunch of different things that happen to her family unit and stuff like that. So it's sort of mysterious, it's very reflective, as you might expect. The prose are quite good, little bit of romance in there as well in the future, and it also ruminates on the certain systemic changes that occur after this and during the virus, as you might expect. It's always trying to portray like the best and the worst of humanity comes out in these catastrophic situations, basically. I thought it was very convincing. I gave it 4 stars. It does feel very overlong to me. It could have definitely been edited and I would have been fine with it. It's hard to tell sort of what is superfluous because it makes its point so often, yet has such like slippery dynamic switches with the vignettes. There's like a little tiny circle O thing that delineates the time. But if you're really caught up in the flow state, it is still very jarring. You're suddenly it's very much like you're in the memory stream and a particular thing happens and she starts ruminating, and then it's just, a flood of memory basically, forwards and backwards. And it can be very disorientating. The actual place, Burntcoat, is like this warehouse that she has purchased after like a windfall of winning at a sculpture prize type deal. And it's like a set piece of the story, as you might expect. It's a pretty interesting place, but strangely, it doesn't feel very situated in time or place after that one event occurs. So she feels very like unmoored in this era, even though she's swimming in memory, and I'm sure that's intentional. Like the actual physicality of her seems to really not matter unless she's interacting with another body. Otherwise, the actual space that she occupies is just not really present, which is not my favorite. But overall, I thought it was quite good at what it was trying to convey thematically. I wouldn't say it is like particularly like a super concerned with a message, but it has one in it. And all of the characters had very specific voices that matched them and were very convincing as well, I thought. I then read The Complete Persepolis by Marjane, Satrapi. This is very popular and I haven't gotten to it until now. I guess it's even like a movie, like an animated film or something like that. It is the author's autobiographical, more like a memoir, because it only covers up till she's like 22, which was very surprising to me actually. It ended very early in her life, but it is her, I believe in Iran, and her living in the like upheavals, basically, from the time period of her being very young to the time period of like 21, 22, 23, something like that. There was like 2 revolutions, lots and lots of people that she knew were murdered by the government, and then as that government was usurped and there was a new revolutionary one in place, more people were killed as well. Other wars were formed from Iran attacking other people, and it's just a wild ride, and I'm sure extremely traumatic to go through. But the thesis sort of that is presented to the reader at the very beginning is showing how dynamic and interesting and different the culture is versus how it is portrayed in media, which it is. Like, I think it is 100% proven correct in this autobiographical work. Basically, the whole like recruiting people for martyrs and people misconstruing the Quran and becoming martyrs and stuff is very very small sect of the population, and only at a certain time in the history of which she's presenting to us here. A lot of it is just her day-to-day life with her parents, with her trying to be a kid, trying to be like a girl in the society that becomes more and more conservative as she gets older, why that is, and sort of her like own revolution, I guess, like as she's a kid and she grows up and starts questioning these things, sometimes very overtly and sometimes with punishments to follow, especially from school teachers and stuff, as well as her leaving for school and going to France, having her life, and then her return to Iran as well. I think it was fantastic. It was a little bit long for me. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. The artwork specifically isn't what I would call like my favorite, but it gets the job done, I think. A fantastic story that I think everybody should read, even if it is a little bit meandering at times. And then the largest concern I guess I had is that I thought it was an autobiographical work when it's more like a memoir. It ends very jarringly and at a strange place. You can kind of see why it's ended there, but it's almost like the author presumes that you know what would happen after this, but I don't anyway, even though I think she's like Canadian even maybe. But or works in Toronto anyway. Then the last book I'll talk about is The Deepest of Secrets, the Rockton #7 book by Kelley Armstrong. This book unfortunately was not very successful. I gave it 2 stars. This is the 7th book in a series, so I'm not going to go on about it very much, but if you don't know what Rockton is, it is a series where Casey is a woman who was like going to be sexually assaulted, and she was a trainee RCMP officer, I think it was, and she essentially uses too much force in defending herself and kills a person and kind of like gets away with it basically. But the kid is like a son of the mafia or something like that, I want to say. And her friend is in a domestic situation, and Rockton is presented by some character in the first book that I can't remember as an option where people who are in domestic situations can go to in the Yukon. It's a very small, privately funded community that you buy into as a safe haven. And so both of these women take that opportunity, go up to Rockton, and she serves as a deputy to the sheriff in Rockton, and there's mysteries happening in this town. So everybody's sort of like traumatized, dealing with trauma, or trauma adjacent, like they're able to care for people in that situation. It's a powder keg type of town, as you can imagine, because there's only like a couple hundred people or something. And yeah, when a murder happens, generally, a book happens. The first couple books are like mystery / romance books, where there's like a will they, won't they component to it. And then the later ones from, I'd say like 4 on maybe, are purely mysteries. In this one, Rockton is ostensibly going to be shut down, and then a murder happens, and it's tied to that sort of mystery. The town is kind of questioning one of the other deputies. It goes out that like everybody's history is of course like expunged, but the police officers have to know what they've done so they can kind of like effectively do their jobs. And one of the deputies was given certain medication in which he enters like a fugue state, and he shot his commanding officer when he was like in Iraq or something like that. And that's sort of, I think, what he fled from to Rockton, if I'm remembering correctly. And this information gets out at the same time as a murder happens, at the same time as people are kind of suspicious and learning that the town is being shut down due to like the people running it wanting more funding and capitalism happening and things like that. And the overall mystery is sort of a spinning wheel mystery. It functions fine, but it's really boring, I would say. There's no tension left in Rockton, I think. And the next book, the 8th book, is going to be the last one, I believe, which is good because I think it's out of steam now. And that's it. That's the weekly reads for me today. I have another 6 books that I'll record and put out in like another few days. And I'll try to keep that bi-weekly schedule, basically, if I keep enough books to even do it anyway. This time I have another 6. That seems like too many. And hopefully this format will do us good. If you have any questions, comments, queries, thoughts, or whatever about any of these books, or you want to ask me a question or interact with me, leave it in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you next video.